everyone. Welcome to Bates Group session on Future of Compliance, how to operationalize your AML program. We do have a lot of people still coming into the waiting room and joining us for this webinar. Thank you for taking the time out of your very busy days to watch us. If you miss any part of this presentation, we will make it available on our YouTube channel via link. And because you registered, you'll receive a link afterwards. So we're going to go ahead and get started. And I'm going to introduce my two wonderful panelists that we have today. We have Lauren Benjamin from Kraken and John Wheathorn from Gusto. Lauren, do you want to go ahead and give an intro for yourself first?
Hi, sure. Yes, my name is Lauren Benjamin. I am the Chief Compliance Officer for Kraken's U.S. operating entity. Happy to be here. Been in financial crimes compliance for approximately 12 years, and before that was in academia, sort of focusing on counterterrorism financing and anti-money laundering related research.
Thanks, Lauren. And we also have John.
Hello, my name is John, and I am a financial crime compliance nerd. So welcome to group therapy, everyone, where we're going to talk about all the fun things. In my free time, I am the AML BSA officer and head of financial crime compliance at Gusto, the HR payroll startup that serves small, medium-sized businesses. I've been in the industry a long time. Doing all kinds of things, all kinds of institutions, and I'm really excited to dig into operations and a really fun topic today.
Well, thank you both. I'm so excited to have you here today. I'm Robin Garrison, managing consultant here at Bates Group. I've been in the industry. It's been long enough that I'm starting to get nervous about saying how long I've been in the industry, but it's been about 16 years in fintech, which, as we know, is in dog years. So that's somewhere around 80 years. I certainly feel it most days. But I am also a compliance nerd, and we're really excited to have everyone here to talk about AML today. So with that in mind, we're going to go ahead and get into conversations. And the first topic that we are going to talk about is evolving risk. So I think everyone who's joined us today is feeling this very poignantly most days, that it's very difficult to keep up with the changing risk landscape, both from a typology perspective, different types of fraud, different types of AML. We could probably do an entire series on FRAML or not FRAML. And in fact, part of me is tempted to have people just kind of duke it out here on a webinar one day about whether we should do FRAML, but that's not today. However, we are going to talk about different typologies, convergence of fraud and AML, and then just generally what my panelists think about these things. So with that in mind, Lauren, can you tell me, how has the evolving regulatory environment impacted your AML strategy at Kraken?
Well, I think it's impacted it quite a bit. With regards to specifically around AML, I think the AML landscape as a whole, the goal from fintech's perspective is to level up to being competitive with banks in terms of how the regulators see us and how the rest of the public will see crypto and fintech world in terms of our AML programs. What I think is missing in a lot of cases is just sort of the education of what is possible on the fintech and crypto side with regards to AML, and the sort of very comprehensive programs that at least my team and my department has created, that we have almost given the nature of the blockchain technology, I think that we have almost a step up on banks in many ways. And I think the education on what we are capable of doing on the AML side is just not known. I mean, the concept of blockchain technology being anonymous has been so pervasive in the public view that breaking down that understanding that it's not anonymous, that it's pseudo-anonymous on the blockchain, but in responsible actors within the environment are required to meet those AML regulations that are put forth by FinCEN, by state regulators, by global regulators outside of the US, that in order to meet those requirements, we have to sort of go above and exceed what was typically expected of a bank on an AML side of things. So I think the biggest challenge we face is that educational perspective, that we're able to show on the AML side, we're meeting our regulatory requirements by doing XYZ and going above and beyond with regards to the blockchain. So like we have to have blockchain analytics, we have to have transaction monitoring, we have to do KYC. And because we're not an in-person brick and mortar sort of environment, it has to be non-documentary and documentary, and it's got to go further and, steps beyond what you may anticipate from a bank level grade AML program. So I think the way that the current regulatory environment has altered that is that we are put under the microscope to a higher degree than you would necessarily find some financial institutions, even some MSBs. And we have to meet that requirement and then sort of go above and beyond that next step so we can prove that we're not that FTX, that we're not the sort of like bad actors in the environment. So I think that's probably the way that we're most impacted by regulatory environments, that we're constantly having to prove ourselves as equal or better than our competitors. And then I think that the second component, which I think we're going to get to in another question, is the data side of things. Because we're all online and because we have these various different technological adaptations that are, part and parcel to our environment, and they're still nascent in development, there is just a massive amount of data that we have at our fingertips, and what to do with it, how to best utilize it, how to best organize it, how to meet our regulatory requirements, but also sort of meet our AML requirements. Because I think compliance very often is thought of as is just AML, when in reality it's AML, it's consumer, it's licensing, it's, there's a whole swath of compliance that we have to be meeting with. So sort of like figuring out how all of that data inputs fits into each bucket, and then how they also work together is probably the two most important and impactful ways that the regulatory environment changing is affecting us.
Has that education aspect, or sort of uphill battle that you have with your regulators and stakeholders like bank partners, has that impacted how you've actually built your AML program, how you've operationalized it?
Um, I think it has, because we're constantly having to prove that we are doing what we are supposed to be doing, and we have to be able to explain it. So, we're not just, I'm going to take sanction screening as just off the top of my head. So, in most cases, when we look at sanction screening, you think of, okay, we want to block bad actors from sanctioned jurisdictions from accessing your platform, and you want to name screen. Well, we have blockchain technology too, right? And it's on the blockchain. We can't associate a transaction directly to a name. So then we have to ensure that we're also blocking wallet addresses and keeping up with those addresses that are doing. And then we have to look at direct and indirect exposure. We have to look at VPN related activity. So I think that there's a lot of different facets that get hit on the fintech side of things that might not necessarily apply to traditional finance, that we're having to implement and then explain to our regulators during examinations or applications or conferences. I've been to a number of conferences where I'm meeting district attorneys or state's attorneys or US attorneys, and they say to me, well, how do you conduct an investigation? How does your FIU work? Are you able to, how do you track an anonymous transaction? I go, well, and so you have to go into all of the details and the truth about what we are really doing and what is really possible. And generally speaking, they walk away going, I didn't know you could do that. And so it's like, yeah, we can, and we can do so much more. Please, let's sit down and have that conversation so we can educate the regulators on it. But in order to do that, you also have to implement all of those other sort of ancillary and secondary and tertiary steps and processes and programs and tools, and to show that you are doing what you're saying you're able to do.
No, that's a really, really good point. And I think we'll hit on that, later as we talk through, especially like the data piece that you said, that being able to evidence what you're doing and explain what you're doing, especially in the advent of some of these newer technologies like GPT-5 GPT-5 just released, that I find my day-to-day has actually fundamentally changed from what it was a couple of years ago, that mostly I'm explaining what happened as opposed to doing the thing. So I think that's all really good information, Lauren. John, in your experience, let's talk a little bit about this dreaded subject, FRAML. Where do fraud and AML efforts often fail to connect?
Ooh, they fail to connect at financial institutions. I think that's the short answer. I think there's a challenge, I think, in any institution, and they're all going to be different in terms of siloing of expertise and information. So your fraud teams and your fraud risk models might be really good at getting fraud. But if you haven't cross-trained that team to understand that there's like what to look out for that needs to go to your AML investigators, in situations where people aren't cross-trained, then you might be missing something, because they say, oh, well, it's not fraud. It's like, yeah, it might technically not be fraud, but it might be really concerning to AML about what this customer is up to. And you need to make sure that you have communication between things. And I think Lauren touched on something about educating regulators, which I think as compliance officers, a lot of our jobs is education. And it's not just regulators, it's internal audiences as well. So it's the different teams, it's senior leadership, it's management. And so I think the misstep is often it's a training misstep where people are not understanding where things need to go. And we always talk about FRAML and we talk about, people should work together, but what does that actually mean for your institution could look very different depending on the nature of the institution and what you're doing. Because in some cases, fraud and AML might actually very rarely talk to each other other than referring things. But in other cases, it's hard to separate the two. So you might have a unified department. So I think it's something that if you're running a program, you need to make sure that you're not having a gap where things aren't getting from one team to another so that you can investigate things and report things.
No, that's a really, really great point, John. And often, as a consultant, we take that outside view, right? So we get to come into companies and say, tell us what you do, tell us about your controls, tell us about your business, tell us about your customers. And it can be a risk. We talk about risk from an AML BSA perspective, and I think everyone just focuses on AML BSA risk assessment. But really, there is a functional risk here of making sure that your leadership is effectively trained and educated, and frankly, your engineers need to understand AML because they can do some pretty significant damage to your programs if they're not aware of how it works too. So I think that's a really great point about our jobs as compliance officers. Really, it's education based. So wonderful. Okay. Well, we've talked about data a couple times. So I think, there's a lot that we can talk about data and, usability of data, visibility of data, how to have good data. The data it just continues to come up in conversation with compliance. And I often find that, my job over the last, I think 10 years has really shifted. We talked about the education aspect, but the skill set that I'm needing as a compliance officer is also it's part data analyst and understanding the value of data and how it gets into a system and how it comes out of a system and how it's transformed in a system. So really excited to hear about your perspectives on this. And I'm going to start with John. So, especially with GPT-5, I keep calling it ChatGPT-5. It's GPT-5. That's big news. And I've been spending a lot of my day today kind of looking at it. But tell me a little bit about how you're balancing your data accessibility, since we now have all of this data at our fingertips and it's absolutely wonderful and we can do anything that we want, with our security concerns and compliance requirements.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think there's a lot of tools. I'm not going to name specific tools because there's a lot of tools out there. And they all have their uses and they all have potential risks. I think what's most important for financial institutions is you need to start with a policy. If you don't have an AI usage policy in your organization, you are in for a world of trouble. I was recently in a room with a bunch of compliance officers and I asked everyone, who here is like using AI in your compliance work? Whose employees are using AI in their work? And I'd say 90% of the people are like, yeah, we're using some form of AI to take data, to analyze data, to automate research, to do all sorts of things. And then 10% of the people didn't realize that their employees are using AI. I think that's what that other 10% was. Because the reality is these tools are becoming so ubiquitous. So you should be working with your legal team, your privacy team, your security team, your IT team, because you need to understand from a data protection standpoint that if you're going to be using a tool, you want to make sure the data is housed in-house, that you're not sending things out there into the wild. You certainly want to be doing investigations on some publicly accessible website or something like that. I think there was an interview recently with the CEO of OpenAI, and he was commenting about how teen users are just pouring their hearts out about their breakups and their mental health issues on their platform. And I was like, oh, wow. And apparently you're reading all of those, right? Because there's no privacy protections when you're out there. So you got to start with having an institution within your institution. You need to set some guardrails for it. And then you have to figure out what data you're going to use and like, what's your goal with using these tools? Is it efficiency? Is it insights? Is it to bring costs down of compliance? That's the question I immediately got when these tools started coming out is, hey, how can we operationalize this? Do you really know all this headcount? Can we use AI to solve for some of this? So there's a lot of questions that have to be answered, but I say you start with the framework and then you operate from there.
Well, that's a really good point, and I'm gonna bring that home for everyone. If there's one thing you take away from what John just said, it's you need to have a policy, because it is way too easy to accidentally put a bunch of stuff in Chat GPT or whatever other open source AI you're using and just violate. I mean, ultimately, you could violate some rules around SARS, or you could violate confidentiality. I mean, there's a lot of potential damage that can be done there. So Lauren, I'm going to go back to you and I want to talk a little bit about, just data without AI, because I think, AI, obviously big topic. It's inclusive of a data strategy, but there's an underlying data strategy too. So how are you guys at Kraken with all of these different things you talked about, all these data streams and sources that you have and systems and controls? How are you ensuring that you have data quality and governance in those AML processes?
That's a really good question, and probably a decent amount of our work as a compliance officer when working with our engineers and our data team. I think that it's, when it comes to governance and data quality, what you're talking about is ensuring the manner in which you collect the data is as automated as possible in some ways. I mean, I think that it also depends on the type of data you're talking about. So like when we're talking about AML related data, we're talking about data that comes in from across multiple different sort of entry vectors. We're talking about PII, we're talking about documentation, we're talking about transactions, we're talking about blockchain monitoring, we're talking about our internal, metrics and KPIs around asset usage and trends and behaviors. So I think the quality aspect of data for fintech is really challenging because you're looking at multiple different places where the data is housed. How do you sort of like aggregate it appropriately? How do you move it through from the financial side to the transaction side to the PII side? And then how do you ensure that that quality data gets routed to the appropriate systems and then moved through the systems, stored appropriately, and then you have to make sure that you're data mapping it appropriately, that your accuracy is accurate, that your access to the data is limited and controlled by who does it. So I think the governance and data quality conversation is a lot larger than just AML. It's really company wide, and I think that's kind of how you have to think of it, that you shouldn't just be going, okay, from a compliance standpoint, I need to make sure that my data around PII sits in this place and that's the only place where I need to use it. Well, the people on the accounting side need to have access, or the people on the finance side need to have access, because we have to do reg reporting to regulators, for example, and it's got to include PII. On the AML side of things, well, we need to make sure that our FIU has access to the PII as well as the transactional data so that we can make sure that we're doing appropriate reviews of everything. So I think from a data accuracy standpoint, the less human touch you get, the cleaner your data is going to be. And that's a hard thing to do. You're going to want to be able to say to your clients, especially and I saw somebody in the chat earlier pop up, like, what about these new fintechs that are sort of starting up? Or, it's hard for the big companies to say, okay, let's figure out a way to pre-fill client information versus open text fields. Because when you get open text fields, you get clients entering names like Homer Simpson, or, you get mistaken addresses because there's a typo that's done. And then when you do the screening, it's not going to give you the appropriate match because there's a slight mistake in the name. So it's about, how do you get the data in? How do you ensure that it's clean? What is your logic set around your screening and your monitoring tools that you have in place? How do you explain all of this to the regulators? Because some regulators are more and more now realizing that data is truly a key component to your AML program, and they're going to dig in. They're going to come to you and say, okay, well, I want to know what is your fuzzy magic? What is your matching logic for your screening profile? How do you do it? Is it okay to have name? Are you doing 100% exact match for identity verification? Are you doing, first letter, second letter, last name, and zip? What is the code that you're putting in to be able to accurately verify? So I think the challenge for all fintechs across the industry is how do we do this? And then I think the challenge is probably greater for these new startups that are coming in and building from scratch. And in some cases, what I found with us is that we were a startup once too. And so, like, when you start up, you tend to build from the bottom up and you don't think, oh, let me get a case management system in, or let me get, this very expensive tool in from the get-go because later on I'm going to need that. You build and then you have all these different data sets. And then you have to figure out later on, oh, how do I put this all into one system so that you can have that bank grade level access to all of the data that you're going to be needing for an investigation? So I think the challenge is both how do you do it efficiently now? How do you do it accurately now? How do you explain it? And then how do you be forward thinking so that you don't screw yourself over, pardon my language, later on when you come back and you go, oh, I didn't do it right back in the beginning because I was building from scratch. I don't know if
Yeah.
that like roundabout answered the question or if I just talked for a while.
No, I think you hit a lot of really important points. And I've been fortunate enough in my career to see a lot of growth of fintechs who became, were startups and then became, a billion-dollar companies. So I think that growth and that scale is a very hard thing to manage. And it sometimes is fintechs don't get it right in the beginning and then they have to course correct. But often when I see really early stage companies, one of the things that I see them do wrong is not prioritizing the value of their data. So they're like, I'm going to go with a processor. That processor is going to be my system of record. I don't have to do anything. And then let's say 6 months down the road, their bank partner comes back and says, hey, I need you to pull me all of the reports for everything that was done here, all of the cards that were issued, all of the, the PII for these customers. And you go to pull it out of that system and you realize it's not what you thought it was, or worst case scenario, you can't pull it out of that system because not all systems are created to export data, especially some of these older systems. And I have run into that so many times. I mean, I'm sure both of you, because we've all sat in exams where we're up until 1 a.m. the night before an exam, just pivot tabling or doing VLOOKUPs to pull different pieces of data to just get a very basic data file together. So I think that's one of the mistakes that I see most often in these early stage fintechs is like just not having a strategy. It's not necessarily getting the best system or having your system be the system of record, but just having a strategy for how you're going to handle that is something that is just fundamentally missed in a lot of cases. And I don't know if either of you guys, have anything to add on to that, that you've seen.
One thing I would just add in, and I'll pivot over to John because I'm sure he probably does too, would be just testing, like model validation, testing and tuning, doing those exercises while painful help to point out where their gaps exist beforehand so that you can go ahead and fix it before it comes to the point where you're getting a finding or a remediation effort, or you have to go back and course correct, like you said. So I think that's one thing that often we do AML independent audits, we get examinations, we have all these sort of big ticket items that are regulatorily required and they're expected. But one of the things that I think do often fall by the wayside is like, oh, we'll get to that. Like we will, but we'll just do it later on, is that sort of testing and validation process. And that I think is, in the end, I think it's also is a question that we may talk about later, is a money saver from an executive standpoint. Like how can we make sure that we don't have to come up with a problem later on? How do we become more efficient? How do we save money for the company? Is if we can fix these problems before they become actual massive remediation projects that cost a lot more money on resourcing. John, off to you. Sorry.
Yeah, no. +1 to testing and model validation, always important. I just got really excited, Robin, when you mentioned pivot tables because I love pivot tables. I will say there is a surprising lack of Excel proficiency in the job market lately. I was surprised with doing some hiring. People were like, "What's a pivot table?" And I was like, "What? What's a pivot table?" You call yourself a compliance professional.
They've never had to do manual transaction monitoring, clearly.
Which listen, I'm old. I think that's what it is. I love Excel. It's like if life could be in Excel or Sheets, I would just be life would be a lot simpler. Yeah, I think it's really a question of data integrity, right? And I think to Lauren's point, how much do you trust that system versus how much, as the old saying, trust but verify, right? Like, this is a great system. Everyone's using it. We're still going to double check things because even the best systems might be configured wrong. There might be something that isn't validated. And it might be on your side, it might be on the data side. Or one piece of data from that one product that barely anyone uses, and you thought you just didn't have any alerts because there's no alerts, but actually the data wasn't configured properly. So you got to make sure that you're checking all that. It's always better that you find it before the auditor finds it, and it's always better that the auditor finds it before the regulator finds it. So it's it's the ounce of prevention. And I think there was a question in the chat about startups dodging the cost of compliance, and Laura mentioned it as well. I think you have to. Startups are in this challenge where, depending on how they're set up, they may or may not have a compliance expert on staff in the beginning. And so it's really those initial hires, those crucial hires, when they come in, getting that education from the beginning for that institution to say, hey, like, there are some very low cost options we can start with while we're small. And regulators will, it's risk based. So if you have a very low volume, you're a brand new product, you can probably get away with manual reviews for a little while, right? Or like a very light touch system. But by the time you're moving, millions, hundreds of millions, billions of dollars in Dogecoin or Ether, you probably need to have a sophisticated system to track where that's going, and screening and sanctions and all that. Because a lot of the regs are written in a very zero-sum liability. And we've seen enforcement actions come down on that because you really just have to be on top of it. And I think the challenge also with data is that the products are evolving. How we move money is evolving. The blockchain technology is evolving. So there's a lot to keep up on, but I think you start with those fundamentals that Lauren was talking about, and just whatever you have in place, you got to make sure it works, and then you can build from there.
All really great points, and shameless plug for Bates. We're more than happy to come into your early stage company and help you before you want to hire a very expensive compliance officer. It's one of our favorite things to do. Well, let's move on and actually talk about AI. There is a lot to talk about, and in fact, if you're as nerdy as I am, and sounds like John and Lauren are also on that level, I've been paying attention to AI for a while, when it was just kind of like a case management thing, really interesting. Okay, maybe we can have some LLMs or whatever, but the pace of change is crazy. I mean, if you fall asleep today and you wake up tomorrow, it's already leapt forward 20 years in human evolution. It's absolutely bonkers how fast this is moving. And the experts that I've talked to in the industry say, just hold on to your pants for the next 6 months. The next 6 months are going to be absolutely wild. We're in this period of exponential growth. It's no longer the hockey stick. We're just straight up now. So kind of with that in mind, I mean, this isn't anything to be scared about. This isn't something whenever I talk about AI and I talk to compliance professionals, and the number one question they ask is, am I going to lose my job? You're not going to lose your job, because as someone asked in the chat, there's going to be a human in the loop. Agentic AI is not there yet. It may get there in the future, but agentic AI, it's just an agentic AI is a decisioning AI. So LLMs are analyzation, agentic is decisioning. It's just not there yet. But we have to prepare for it, right? So as compliance officers and compliance professionals, we need to be aware of this technology, aware of how it's changing, because your strategy and your risks 1 month might be different in a month or two, from that point, just because of the pace of change. And I will say it's very hard to keep up to date with these things. But on the flip side, is a wonderful tool. I heard a statistic once at a conference that just blew my mind, and it was something like, I think the FBI was the one that gave the statistic that we only detect 3% of money laundering that actually moves through the US. So 3% is a crazy, crazy small number. So I think we need to look at, these tools are not going to replace what you're doing in that 3%. They're going to say, all right, let's get the rest of the 97 that you're not capturing today. So with that in mind, I would love to hear, Lauren, I'm going to ask you first. I'd love to hear about your strategy for AI. How are you leveraging it? What kind of automation do you have? Tell me a little bit about your process design and just how that works within your company.
So I think there's a slight difference between automation and AI. So I think automation is utilized a whole lot more than AI, as AI is sort of like now being incorporated into more AML processes and programs. I will say on the AI side of things, to your point, and to earlier points, the one thing that you need to make sure you're doing before you implement is a ton of testing so that you can explain everything. Because I think that's what the regulators are going to come to you with. They're going to say, okay, you're using AI. We know it's big. We know it's coming out there. We know it's useful. It's resource and efficiency driven. However, you have to be able to explain it to somebody. And so, like, that's what's expected of compliance officers, that we're not just like plugging and playing and walking away, but that we're able to plug and play, review it. It's been pre and post tested. It's continuously validated, and then we can explain it to the regulators. On the automation side of things, and on the AI side, I think the way it's being leveraged, at least the way that we're leveraging it now, most commonly, is the expectation of our customers and our clients is that blockchain technology moves at the speed of seconds, seconds and minutes. So therefore, we're looking at hundreds of thousands to millions and billions of transactions that are occurring, and the expectation is it's done before you can say it's done. And if that's the case, then you need to be able to run screening, identity verification. You need to be able to run transaction monitoring. You need to be able to run blockchain monitoring at the time of the transaction, pre-settlement, which at a bank may take 3 to 5 days, but for us takes a matter of minutes. So we need to be able to automate all of those toolings to be able to ensure that we're moving with the speed of the transaction to catch that 3% or more, hopefully, of the illicit activity that may be occurring through those transactional patterns. And so I think that's the first place where you look like, okay, how can we best automate our screening? How can we best automate our verification processes? How can you best automate all of your monitoring tools so that it is occurring pre-settlement, which means in a matter of seconds? And then how do you best automate the review of those alerts so that they can be decisioned, not at the end decisioning where you're thinking, like the generative sort of AI that you were talking about, not making a decision as to whether or not you're filing a SAR on it or you're closing an account or what you're going to be doing with that relationship, but looking at an alert and saying, no, that's a false positive. We can pull all of these data points together. We can very quickly look at it. AI can say, yeah, that's not an accurate alert. We can go ahead and exit it out. So I think that's where the first place where AI will be utilized is either in sort of that triage standpoint where it's going to quickly look at something and then determine whether or not you're looking at a false positive or it does need to be escalated over to human. And then the second place that I'm seeing it most often in the AML side on our side of things is in the sort of initial gathering of information, that sort of open source and inter data research that's used to be conducted by a whole team of investigators. So rather than spending an hour or two doing online research about a person, doing Google searches, going on to different sites and Reddit forums or whatever it is that you're doing from an investigative perspective, and filling in all that information into a text body that you would then turn into a dossier that would then be whittled down into a case review, that all takes time. And that was my favorite part about being an investigator. So I'm kind of sad that it's no longer the key component to the AML job, but because of the volumes that we're looking at and the speed to which you're expected to be able to review it, utilizing AI to quickly search through open source information on the internet and throw it into a digestible text body that you're able to look at and say, okay, this person is a PEP. They were identified as, the consulate general of Argentina, and their family members are X, and they're located in this jurisdiction, and we can verify that their information matches open source information that we're finding that matches the data that we have internally to this person, is very useful and very efficient building. So like you can move through reviews at a much faster pace, which cut down on your backlogs, which means that any remediations that you have move quicker. Any backlogs that you have to address, you can move through them quicker. And you can keep up with the speed of your BAU as it comes in. So I think that's probably the first place from an AML side that we're really diving into how to best utilize AI from an efficiency and resourcing perspective.
And to address one of the questions in the chat here is the human in the loop, right? You just said it, Lauren. The human in the loop sort of moves up the loop,
exactly.
right? Instead of the beginning, right? Which I loved the research too. I loved going to the library in college and pulling the books off the shelf and opening them and stuff. I don't think that's what people do anymore. It's kind of a bug. But I think that's what you're talking about, right? Is the human in the loop. They're at that final stage.
Exactly. So like there still has to be a human looking at that case and saying, yes, we need to maintain the relationship, but put these mitigating controls on, or no, we need to exit this relationship and report them because of the activity that we're seeing, or the background information on this the screening alert matches the information we're finding online. And so there's still a human that has to make that final decision on what to do with regards to that client or that transactional activity. But all of that, it's like I used to call it a dossier because I always wanted to be intelligent. So like that dossier building is where the AI, I think, is really becoming very useful.
I'm gonna call it a dossier now. I love that. It's much better than investigation file. It's a
Oh, for
dossier.
sure. Like, yeah, go dossier at somebody.
Yes, I love that. I'm gonna change all of our policies to say that now. That's fantastic. Done. End of webinar. That's all we're taking away from this. So, I'd love to hear, like, are you having conversations with regulators? Because what we're hearing is pretty much, even let's say that tomorrow an AI comes out that can make that final decision. The expectation is that we're not doing that right now, right? We're not, even if we could pull the person, we're not ready. I mean, what's your perspective on that?
So I was actually asked recently, I won't say by who, but they asked two questions. First, they asked me, one, is there an AI product that can just replace all of our junior AML analysts? And I said, absolutely not. Um, and their second question was, when will AI be able to do that? And I was like, ooh, I mean, so that's an interesting question, right? And you said something very interesting. And I'm actually going to disagree with something you said, Robin. You said people aren't going to lose their jobs because of AI. I don't think that's true. I think people that aren't willing to become AI fluent will not be employed. I think this is a requisite skill set that investigators of the future, managers of the future, compliance officers of the futures have to become literate in AI. You have to understand how to use these tools. Otherwise, it's like saying, well, I'm not really a big fan of these computers. It's like, well, that's tough. Like, you're going to need to understand what the cloud is. And if you're in crypto or dealing with stablecoin payments in your institution, you better understand the blockchain. Like, there's a lot of fundamental stuff. But I think the sea change of what AI can do as a tool is 100% what Lauren said in the beginning. It's all about efficiency. There's a lot of things, and we're using them at Gusto, and it's great. I love the dossier term too, but we are using AI to really not just automate external research, but do the initial triage, right? So there's AI that's able to say, where we used to, do a negative news search string, plug it into Google or Bing, whoever does that, and you get the results back, and then you'd have an analyst say, oh, is this relevant? Is this the person? Let me go to the websites and download the pages. We're at a point where AI will take your customer file. They know you're doing an EDD review or an investigation. It'll say, hey, I did the research. Here's what I found out. Here's what's relevant and why. Here's a quick, concise summary in a dossier format, right? And I have all the notes. I have all the receipts. So here's all of the research, and it's ready to go for your case file. So suddenly that EDD investigation that might have taken 45 minutes or an hour is 15 minutes, right? And the agent, the human in the loop, they're using AI, and it's actually taking away the boring stuff, which is, saving documents, type it in the file name, uploading it over here from this system, that system. And suddenly it's just ready to go. So they can focus on the analysis part, which is, I think, the fun part. I'm always reminded of a case I had many years ago where I still try and think about if AI could have done it, where I found a website and there was a picture of some people by a truck, and I couldn't figure out why they were getting payments from someone else. And I noticed on the truck there's a DOT license number on the door. And so I was like, I wonder who owns that truck. And sure enough, when I looked up the DOT license number, it was the party that was sending the money. And I realized they were leasing trucks, right? Is AI able to make that connection and then go, hey, I'm going to go to the DOT website and look up that ID number? Probably not. I think we're way off from it being able to put all those things together. But what I think initially, in between now and I think the next year or two, you're going to see really at scale efficiencies coming into play. And I think at larger institutions that have historically had very large financial crime compliance departments, there's going to be a lot of efficiency drives. And I'm talking big, large financial like banks, very, very large institutions. And on the flip side, I think there's going to be a demand for people that are very fluent in AI. I will say from the regulator perspective, we have talked to regulators. And I think generally, if you can explain it, if there's an audit trail and they understand what you're doing, they're open to it. I don't think anyone is ready or willing to automate decisions, though. I'm 100% with Lauren with that. I would never allow that. I will say we get accused of that all the time in the industry. Whenever it's a slow news day, I don't know if anyone has read this, you'll find an article, and it doesn't matter what fintech it is. They'll be like, so and so says their account was closed at this fintech. Is your money safe? And it's the same story. They're like, oh, they didn't tell me what was going on, and they said it was non-reviewable, and they just closed my account. Maybe I'm better off at a bank. And it's like, ooh, when Reach for Comment, they said they can't comment on accounts. And it's like, no one's discriminating against people. No one's closing out accounts willy-nilly with a bot. And those people know exactly what they were doing with their accounts. They were up to all kinds of shenanigans before they were closed. And I know at least at Gusto and every other institution I've worked at, I'm sure the case is the same at Kraken. There's a long discussion before we sever a client relationship. We are looking at all of the factors. We're really saying, is there any possible way we can mitigate this? We'll give you a million chances to really explain it. But at the end of the day, we're taking a risk by having customers. And, if people don't abide by our terms and conditions, yeah, we're going to close your account. But that's not going to get automated. The risks are just too high when you get those things wrong. And it's less so about offboarding, it's more about onboarding. I'd be concerned about keeping customers that are very dangerous, that the AI is like, well, it's probably fine, right? So I don't think we're ready to the decision making. I don't think that's ever going to go away because ultimately you're accountable for it, and you never want to say the algorithm said we had to do that. That's a scary place to be.
Yeah, you're welcome to disagree with me any day. I love that. We're gonna rumble.
Absolutely, I'm here for it.
I actually agree with what you said. I think that was a very, very important clarification, and kind of goes back to our Excel comment of, hey, we love Excel. We don't really use it that much anymore, and there's a reason.
Don't break my heart, please.
I used it earlier. I
Thank you.
do pivot tables for fun.
I mean, just as a quick follow-up to that, I mean, AI fluency is a real thing. And I think in the industry, even in the compliance circles that we are all in, you will find people have a very different relationship and experience with AI. And there's people that are kind of resistant. There's people that are curious. And then there's people that are adopting, testing, driving that. And I think the organizations that adopt early and often and are really testing things, to Lauren's point again, you want to test things before you deploy them. I think they're the ones that are going to see better efficiency gains, and they're going to be more accurate in their detection tools.
And on the sort of fluency part, there is
Yeah.
more and more coursework that's out there. I mean, there's from MIT offering online courses to ACAMS to everybody. You're seeing AI conversations, certifications, coursework, education, webinars everywhere. So I do agree. I think that efficiency moving forward in the future is going to be an absolute key component to a compliance department. So having that AI intelligence is going to be key, and understanding that, yeah, we're not going to necessarily, I started off my AML career as a surveillance agent at a bank. You're not going to need that anymore because you're essentially triaging alerts that are being sent over to people doing actual investigations. Well, that triage part should be now done by AI. And that will really help to narrow down your false positives so that the alerts that you're actually reviewing are fortuitous and giving you information that's useful for reporting purposes and weeding out those false positives. So you're not looking at, I have 30,000 alerts a month. And you're like, oh my God, why do you have so many when it should be, X number of alerts? And it's like, well, that's how you figure out where your false positives are hit. So AI can be used for efficiency and alert triaging, but then it can also be used to say, okay, we're obviously seeing a huge number of false positives. How do we better configure our initial settings in the first place so that we don't see those false positives? So I think it's very cyclical in terms of its fluency and its efficiency building.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are really great points, you guys. My first job in AML was typing paper forms into an Access database. So talk about jobs that don't exist anymore. Man, I use slap OCR on it and you grab all the data, but why are you using a paper form to begin with is the question.
Right.
we all come from somewhere. But I'd love to hear, John, you've given some really great points, but we know that not all AI is created equal, and you can put a wonderful AI into a terrible system and have horrible governance around it. And I mean, not all systems are created equal. I think everyone should be very skeptical about any system right now. So can you tell me a little bit about your vendor selection? How you're making sure there's model transparency. Do you have any performance metrics that you're looking for? And how do you go about making that decision?
Okay, I'm gonna preface this with, I think I'm genuinely a nice person. I think I'm a nice guy. I think I'm nice to vendors. However, I have a very low tolerance for misrepresentations of what the product is. So in the last year, we've looked at over 30 vendors that have AI solutions, and we've done over a dozen POCs to see like, hey, what do you actually have under the hood? I would say the majority of them don't actually have AI. What we find is it's just they're like dressing up machine learning or automation and saying that it's AI. And then we're like, well, where's the AI? And they're like, well, here's a demo environment where we think we'll be in 6 months. I'm like, okay, so you don't actually have AI. Like this is not what I'm being sold right now. So I think and AI technology is advancing so fast. And we mentioned that earlier. You said it's not just the hockey stick going up, which I've never heard of hockey stick, but I like that. It's straight up. Yeah, or other way, depending on which way you're looking at me. So we've actually, our finance team at Gusto has said, listen, we're very wary of signing any contract beyond a year if it's AI, because what if the tech is so out of date, right? What if your vendor is not there? Like, so we want to be really certain that if we're going to bring in a vendor, we're going to pay for something or build something in house, that it really works. And so while I'm a nice guy, we really vet our vendors. Like we put them through so much testing, so much. We talk to current clients. Like we really kick the tires in a very big way and take it to our mechanic and check it all out. Because at the end of the day, if you're the BSA officer, it's your name on the program, right? And so if you're saying, well, we use this tool, and then oh no, now you're gonna have to redo investigations or redo screening or something like that, you're in a world of trouble. So we've taken the approach that we're very AI first at Gusto, just as a company in general. We actually have a monthly stipend for every employee for AI. So this is we started this a few months ago, but every employee at Gusto gets a monthly stipend you can use for a number of AI for just your personal life, not for work stuff. Just because we see it as this critical skill that people really need to develop. And even when we started introducing it within compliance, there was some initial hesitation from analysts. And we're like, listen, what if we give you some templates and you could get your first draft of your SAR narrative using these templates and using this AI? And they're like, oh, I don't know about that. And then suddenly like, wow, this is a lot faster. And then I can customize and edit things and doing all that. We're not at a place where it can make editorial decisions. That's what the human in the loop comes in. But there's a lot of things that even simple AI tools in the right hands can be really, really helpful. Where I'm wary and where I put things through the paces is where they promise a lot. Where they're like, well, we're just gonna solve all your false positives, and we're gonna. I'm like, okay, are you though? Because now I'm worried about the negatives and what's not there. But I think there's a lot of opportunity for companies to experiment in a safe environment, right? And you can really take some things and put them as in addition to, right? So like static rules are not going away anytime soon, but if you have AI looking at, hey, we look at what you filed on in the past or what you've discovered as fraud, and we want you to look at these things, that can be really powerful. There can be some really, really cool stuff. But you gotta just really do your due diligence on who you're looking at and understand that they might have a good product today that might be out of date in a couple months. And that is challenging, at least for us, because we're constantly evaluating, are we getting that ROI? Because I'm constantly being asked by our finance team, hey, are we getting an ROI? Can you tell us, like, are we saving headcount? Are we being more efficient? Are we being more accurate? Are we having higher quality? So these are the questions that as a leader you have to answer for.
I also love the idea of doing a POC, right? Most of these companies are completely open to say, hey, we'll do a 90-day POC, and then you run it in parallel with your system. Don't just go out and buy stuff. That's, don't do that. I'm very skeptical. I think, John, you said it pretty robustly there as well, that you really need to do your due diligence. So don't just go out and buy the coolest looking tech, because it could be garbage in a wrapper. We've seen this before. Sorry. So we're coming to the end here, and we're going on tour, so you can come see our comedy, and then we'll release those dates. Just joking, of course. unless you guys want that. But I will say, go ahead and ask us if there's any questions that you guys have. We're on the last slide. We'll talk a little bit about cross-functional success stories. Say that 10 times fast. But if you've got any questions that you want me to ask Lauren and John, please feel free to do so here. And then if you don't get an opportunity to ask them, you can always ask us on LinkedIn or our email. So kind of with that in mind, I want to talk a little bit about what it looks like, because we mentioned before, this isn't just your compliance department. It's not just your AML team that's implementing an AI. I think, Lauren, you're the one that said it, that it really is an entire company effort to implement these tools. You have to have the strategy. You have to, have buy-in from the very top. So I would love to know, John, again, kind of starting with you here, and maybe, give us your semi-spicy opinions here, but how do you foster collaboration between your compliance and technical or engineering teams?
Yeah, so there's always a bandwidth question, is what I find, right? There's only so many engineers, there's only so many data scientists. So it's really about what's the maximum value, what's the easiest lift for us to get things to and see what works, right? So we had a really good success story with, and I alluded to it earlier, our enhanced due diligence reviews and really using AI to do that external research. And we've basically cut our EDD review times in half, which is great. And it's like really clear audit trails, and we're getting all of that. And that was actually a really light lift from our tech teams, because it was just, we took our vendor that it has our alerts for EDD review, and we said, hey, plug it into this vendor that's going to do the research, and it plugs it in. But again, because we have policies, we have governance, we have data privacy, all these concerns, there's a vetting process. So, and there's other teams that want to use AI tools for various parts of the business. So the security and IT teams, the privacy teams, they have to look at everything, and there's a lot of requests. So it's like, hey, I would like to use this tool today. And they're like, well, we've got a lot of tools we're looking at. So we really try and work with each other to make those reviews possible, to get things approved so that we can try them at least in a limited scope, right? Using real data. I would also say, we mentioned, like, do a POC. Don't just use the vendor's data. Don't trust that. That's a trap. Use your own data, or make up some data and put it in there. See what it is. But yeah, it's a lot of collaboration to make sure that they understand the value and why you're asking. Because it is an ask, right? If we're changing tools or adding tools, it's a lot of work to be putting things in there and to review it and do all that. So we've had some really great success with EDD, and it's been great. We're able to respond to customers faster. We're able to get people onboarded faster. We're having higher satisfaction rates from the analysts, because they literally don't have to save file names and do all this. It's done for them. They're like, this is great. I was like, okay, good. Now your productivity expectations go up. So there's a plot twist, right? So it's like, hey, if the review goes faster, we expect you to do more reviews in a week. So there's a balance to everything in there. But I think we're going to see more and more going from things that are simple and binary, like screening and KYC, to things that are more complex. So if you're doing ongoing monitoring of your customers, for so-called Rihanna cases, as my friends call it, which is good girls go bad. When your customers go out there and you want to know about them, right? So, how can you leverage AI to know when your good girls have gone bad, and get that review, and filter out noise? And I think AI is getting better and better at filtering out noise. And that's actually one of the most exciting things for me, is the noise filtering. Because I think a lot of AI in the beginning was a lot of like, well, you've asked this general question. Here's like a lot of things on the history of, I'm like, just tell me what I need to know. And it's getting a lot better. Like, very rapidly, we're seeing models that can do a lot more. So I'm excited to see where we can go with that.
Well, we've got Dossier and we have Rihanna. So there we go. Just coin those terms right now. That's fantastic. I never heard that. Lauren, so what do you have any KPI recommendations that, based on kind of what John's talking about and what we've talked about? Are there some KPIs for, uniting these different functions across AML that you're looking at?
Absolutely. And not just, I'm gonna sort of, since he touched so beautifully on the AI component, and we've had similar like experience with, especially around like EDD and CDD. It's been extremely resource friendly. It's helped us become very efficient on those sides. But other KPIs, I think one thing that is almost consistently in all of the compliance environments I've been in is that compliance is always seen as the sort of money suck. We're the blockers, we're the no people, we lose. I know, right? It's awful. And we're always trying to like tell everybody that no, we're not the side that's saying no. Like we're telling you how to do it in a compliant manner. So versus saying, no, you can't do it. Like the goal of the compliance officer is not to be like, no, no, sorry, you can't do that at all. We're just done. No more money making for the company at all. But rather like this is how we can do it in a way. I think in the KPI side of things is the understanding that while so like the challenge we face is, our data teams, our product teams, our business side is always like, we want to do this. Can we onboard people faster? Can we do it faster? Can we ask for less information? Can we truncate this process a little bit so that we can move them through the process in a more expedient manner. And then it's our job to say, well, yes. However, if you do it in this way and you cut out all of these components that may be required, later on, it's going to come back to bite you in the butt and you're going to get a finding from a regulator and you're going to have to go back and remediate all these sorts of things. So the question that, we should be asking ourselves together from our product side, our finance side, our business side, our data side is, okay, this is what we want. How do we get there in a compliant manner so that we are all meeting our KPIs? We want to have an onboarding flow that is almost entirely automated. It occurs within X amount of time, very little client friction, and results in positive data outputs that we can feel confident in the information that's being verified is being verified accurately so that moving forward into that Rihanna stage, we know that at least the initial review is accurate. So we're not looking at a bad girl. We're looking at a good girl and we've said yes. And that should she become bad later on, we know that that initial good girl data is accurate. So, I think that's the point that I try to work with our engineers and our data people early on is to say, yes, we can do this. This is how we do it in a way so that both of our KPIs are met appropriately and are done compliantly. So, how do we move it faster? Well, let's automate. Let's not give a text field. Let's pre-fill that information. Let's ask the client for the last four of their social. Let's find a vendor that can then pre-fill that information, use a phone number to give us all of the appropriate PII, run it through one of our vendors, verify that it's accurate. They can get onboarded within a certain period of time. Should they hit a dollar threshold, we'll go ahead and ask for ID. When we get the ID, let's use OCR data to pull that information out, cross-reference it against the verified information, make sure all systems are talking to one another. The client never gets touched in any way, shape, or form. All they do is provide you with a phone number. And yet we're doing all of this information on the back end, which saves us later on from having to do a massive remediation when we only have the last four social numbers when we actually need the entire 9. Because that later remediation is going to cost you not just in technology, not just in finding, but in resource hours of your teams having to go back, do the analysis, input the accurate data into the system, make sure it all reconciles across various systems. So I think that's the one takeaway is that when it comes to KPIs, we may want to do everything now, but we have to be forward looking. You have to go, okay, this is going to cost us a lot later on if we shortchange ourselves now in order to get to that sort of like goal state without moving through it in an appropriate manner.
I think that's phenomenal. It's great advice there, Lauren. I'm getting very distracted by the Rihanna conversation. I'll be honest with you. I gotta figure out ways to bring that into
Rihanna is
normal.
very distracting. That is a good takeaway.
That's the takeaway. So actually, I was gonna ask you guys in the last 2 minutes that we have here, what your key takeaways are for everyone who has stayed with us here till the end, which we actually have quite a few people that stayed with us through the end. So John, give us your 60 seconds of takeaways here.
AI is here and you're either in it or you need to get in it because that's really the only option. So if you remember nothing else, make sure that you have a framework in your institution. You should have an AI usage policy. You should be aligned with legal, IT security, and really look at not just what's available today, but start thinking about, if you're a senior leader, where is your program 2 or 5 years out, right? And as you start thinking about what are the skills you're going to need, start training within, right? It doesn't just have to be off the shelf. Train your employees to use the AI in the way that you want them to. and get them comfortable with it, because they're going to be able to then evaluate things as new products come out.
Great. Lauren, what you got?
I think that's really excellent. I think forward thinking is absolutely key. Education, both outward and inward, is absolutely key. And I love the idea of implementing training internally to build the people that you have to be able to move with the technology and the systems that you're building. I think what is often misunderstood is that there is a great deal of institutional knowledge that somebody who's stayed with a company gains over a certain period of time, and that if you're building new processes and you're bringing in AI and you're using that on with the people that have already got the institutional knowledge of how your company works, of how an investigation is run, you don't have to then hire out and then have a 6-month, lead up period where they're learning the company and they're learning the systems and they're learning this. You have that already embedded within your workforce, and you're just sort of upscaling them. So I think that's a really good point from John. AI is here, but again, I think it's I think forward thinking is really key and really hard to do, especially for those that aren't like the huge players, that you are a new startup. um, you will end up in the future going, oh, I wish I had thought about that from the beginning and not having to fix it later on. So like, if there's a way to think about that from the outset, you're going to be ahead of the game and within a short period of time, because everything moves so fast and dynamically.
Well, wonderful. Thank you, Lauren and John, so much for your insights today. This has been a very insightful panel. Thank you, everyone who stayed with us and watched our webinar. It will be available online afterwards. And we hope you have a great rest of your day. Oh, and don't forget to get your CLE credits. The code is right there on the screen.